White as snow, red as blood. Chapter 3. Snow White sang some tunes as she prepared the essentials for daily meals. She had everything ready besides the bread and had to wait for the dough to rise before putting it over the fire. The smell of freshly baked bread was her favorite scent food-wise, and Rose loved this recipe more than others, so Snow knew it would win Rose's forgiveness. Not that she needed to. As she began stitching a patch into an old dress while she waited, she spotted something moving from outside the window. She ignored it and went back to work. It was probably only a squirrel or a rabbit. She continued her work and was satisfied that the material blended well with the original. Snow tied the thread and cut the extra with tiny scissors, which she then returned to her apron pocket, setting the needle down on the table. The dough had risen, so it was time to bake it. She slid the bread onto the brick stones just above the fireplace. While the buttery loaf baked, she went back to the window. She watched along the trees to see if she could spot any wild animals. That's when she saw brown fur once again. This time, she knew she couldn't be imagining it. Before she scrambled outside, she pulled the uncooked bread out and set the lumpy roll on the table. Afterward, she bolted out the door with her blue cloak draped over her shoulders. She ran to where she last saw the brown fur. Sure enough, there were bear paw prints. Their fuzzy prints came back. Yet something had stopped him from coming any closer. Snow White put her hood up. If he was too scared to face them, she would pursue him. He shouldn't be freezing out here when he knew they would accept him for the night or even the rest of winter. As she made her way through the forest, tracking down the prints, she heard frenzied shrieking. She looked down at the paw prints, wanting to follow them, but her heart had already decided. She strayed away from the tracks and went to help whoever had come across trouble. That's when she came upon the centaur. This time, he had a young eagle stuck in his unruly beard. She honestly didn't know how or why these things happened to this centaur. And she certainly didn't understand why she or Rose always found him this way. They never encountered him under better circumstances. "Arg, you stupid bird," he hollered, ready to bat the poor thing. "No, wait!" Snow White cried, coming forward. The centaur looked at her, and the roll of his eyes said everything. However, he responded, "At least it's not red. If you're so fond of the bird, get it out." Snow White quickly ran over to the centaur and told him to hold onto his beard where the eagle wasn't tangled up. Then, she carefully tried calming the eagle. It scratched her with its claws, causing her blood to drip on the snow. She pulled away, assessing the cuts. Thankfully, they weren't too deep. She bit her lip. "We might have to cut more of your beard." The centaur sneered, and an awful sound emerged from the back of his throat. "Oh, all right." Snow calmed the bird and got out her small scissors. With every snip, the centaur glowered. Finally, once the hairs were cut, Snow quickly untangled the eagle. The magnificent creature expanded its wings and soared into the sky. Snow ran forward a bit, a merry chuckle escaping her lips as she watched the young eagle fly to freedom. An arrow buzzed over her head and nailed the eagle. It shrieked before it fell in front of Snow's feet. She whirled around to the centaur, who held a bow in his left hand. He grinned victoriously, galloping over to the dead animal. Snow pressed a hand against her wounds and gawked at the scene. "Why did you kill it?" she whispered, looking from the eagle to the centaur. "I helped you because I didn't want it dead." The centaur huffed, plucking the arrow out of the bird. "Like it matters. You eat meat, don't you?" "Not eagle meat, no." "Look at yourself, girl. Don't you see, it harmed you as it did me?" Snow White looked down at the pathetic wounds, which probably wouldn't leave any scars once she applied the necessary ointments. It was nothing compared to the mark hidden further up her sleeve. It was only defending itself. The centaur tossed the eagle over his shoulder. Well, whatever, I'm going to cook it for dinner. As he turned to leave, Snow White abruptly asked, "Why are you up here alone?" He spun sharply. "You shouldn't worry about that. I'll have you know that if you were your outspoken sister, you'd be dead alongside this stupid bird. Make sure you don't cross me again." Then he darted off, leaving her there. She looked around her. This part of the forest was unfamiliar, and she couldn't see the trail her family regularly maintained. "I suppose I've gotten myself lost," she sighed. Then she stared at the sky to see where the sun was heading. "Well, at least I know what direction home is. I can already hear Rose's lecture from here." Before she strolled off, she cut the bottom half of her apron and bandaged her arm. Blood soaked through the first layer but didn't pass the second. Her boots crunched in the snow once she set off in the direction she decided was home. Night overtook day, and no smoke from the house could be seen, so Snow's heart rate picked up as panic set in. She sunk to her knees and stared at the ground. It was just as white as her skin and even her dress. There came a snap from behind her. She turned, and a large grizzly bear was approaching her. In the darkness, she couldn't tell if it was the same bear she and her sister had cared for many years before. She stood slowly and calmly, knowing that running was the last thing she wanted to do. The bear came closer. In the moonlight, she saw its compassionate eyes and was no longer afraid. She extended her hand, and the bear came forward to rest his nose on her palm. A smile spread as she embraced the bear. His soft fur and body heat warmed her instantly. "My friend, you've finally shown yourself to me. You've grown a great deal." "As have you, Snow White," a young man's voice said. Snow White looked around, then held the bear's face. "Did you hear that? Is someone else out here?" "It is me," the voice spoke, "your fuzzy companion." She blinked, staring into the bear's hazel eyes. "You're speaking to me." "How?" "It is the grace of the Creator." The bear ambled forward. "Come, Snow, I will lead you home. And then I shall resume my mission." "Your mission? Is that why you never came back?" Snow White asked, walking beside him while stroking his fur. He gave no response, as if he suddenly couldn't speak to her anymore. After some time, Snow and the bear reached the cottage. Before she went, she knew she had to give the bear a proper goodbye this time. She removed her long blue necklace and placed it around the bear's thick neck. "I hope you succeed with your mission, my dear friend. When you do, I expect a visit so I can finally finish reading that book you love so much." "Be safe," she said, pressing her forehead to his. Then she walked to the house. Before she entered, she looked back. He was already gone. She felt glum about the brief visit, though it made her wonder why he could speak. No average bear could do that, but he was never an ordinary bear. Snow walked inside the house and found Rose eating dinner with Richard. Both sisters jumped to conclusions while the truth played hide-and-seek. "Oh, I'm sorry," Snow White said sheepishly, putting her cloak on a hanger. "I didn't know you were bringing company." Rose stood and crossed her arms. "You set this up, didn't you? A private dinner? How did you even know I was bringing someone?" Snow looked around the home in awe as her bread was perfectly baked, and the fire was still roaring. "I didn't prepare this." "Well, I mean, maybe I did. I made the dough, but it wasn't done when I left." A wild thought crossed her mind. Did the bear do this? The table was pushed over further away from the fireplace, so it was possible. Possible? No, bears don't talk or bake bread. Then again, Snow White had seen strange things in the mountains, and magic made practically anything achievable. So you weren't just spying on us the whole time? Or do you have an explanation as to where you went? Rose asked, now eyeing the cloth tied around Snow's arm. Snow rushed to her sister and said, I think I must be crazy, Rose. I saw him again. He's alive. And he talked to me. I mean, the words didn't come from his mouth, but I'll explain it later. The point is that he's been here this whole time looking out for us. Richard stood from his seat. Are you talking about the bear? Yes, Snow White answered, confused as to why her sister's date knew about their fuzzy friend. Where and when did you last see him? He asked, going to the door. Around 5 minutes ago, he brought me back to the house. Why is the bear so important to you? He's my brother. Richard shouted, unable to keep it to himself even when he knew how crazy it sounded. Snow White looked at Rose Red for some answers to who Richard was. Rose closed her eyes, regretting her decision to bring him to the house. He's Prince Richard. And for your information, I've been asking him that same question while we waited for you to return. But this is the first time he's given me that answer. Richard turned to them. I'm not messing with you. I promise. He sighed, clearly wanting to bang his head on something. I know it sounds insane, but it's true. We've hidden the truth about Nathaniel for years. He's not in Avani receiving education. He's been cursed this whole time. When he was 7, he tracked down a wizard, causing havoc in the kingdom. He thought it would prove his worth or something. However, the wizard turned my brother into a bear, and well, that doesn't matter. I watched Nathaniel run off in shame. He was a prince this whole time? Snow White said, shocked that she and her sister were childhood friends with a prince. Please, tell me anything you know. Richard pleaded to Snow White. She looked up at him and said, Fuzzy. I mean, Nathaniel said that he was out on a mission. That's all I got out of him. So I was right, he does know. Richard strode to the door and opened it. A cold breeze entered, making the fire shiver. Before he left, he curtly nodded to the girls. Thank you for your hospitality and for looking after him when I couldn't. I must begin my search for him immediately. You two stay here. Rose rushed after him, gathering her cloak and stopping the door before it slammed shut. Wait, Your Highness, you'll get lost if you go alone. I know this mountain better than anyone. Snow tried to follow, but Rose yelled at her to stay inside and properly clean her wound. So Richard and Rose went off on an adventure again. Rose had to run to keep up with Richard's fast pace. When he crouched next to a print in the snow, she finally had a moment to catch her breath. It was undoubtedly a bear's paw print. He went this way, Richard muttered, briskly moving further into the forest. Then the wind turned wild, knocking falling snow into their eyes. Rose clutched her cloak tightly and turned her head downward. A heap of soft snow crumbled off a branch, landing on her hooded head. Before she could shake it off, Richard compassed her as the wind continued to whirl through the trees. Once the wind died, Richard stepped back and brushed the snow off her hood. She sniffed, and he worriedly grasped her shoulders, leaning down slightly to see underneath the shadows of the red hood. Are you all right? Rose rubbed icy snot on her sleeve, wishing he wasn't looking intently at her. Yeah, I'm fine. But the trail. Richard turned, releasing one of her shoulders. Great, there goes that lead. Hey, we should head back before it gets worse out here. It won't be much of a reunion if we die from the cold, and I don't want to be responsible for a prince's death. Rose removed his hand from her shoulder and tugged at his sleeve briefly so he would follow her. With grief in his heart, Richard faced the way they came. He was increasingly grateful for Rose's help but hadn't considered how his safety would affect her. No doubt the kingdom would blame her and Snow if any harm fell upon him. Richard considered what he could offer Rose to make up for the trouble he and apparently his brother had caused them. It was his duty to show his people the gratitude they deserved. As she guided them back to the house, he said, "Thank you for all you have done today. I realize our journey together was abrupt." Rose hummed thoughtfully, stomping through the snow. "It has been a strange day, but I enjoy a change of pace." She smiled back at him, her maroon eyes dark. It was hard for Richard to believe Rose and Snow were sisters when their appearances were so starkly different. He had previously thought he had a thing for blondes, but Rose was quickly changing his mind. Then, he lingered on a wild fantasy of asking Rose to marry him. How could a man better express his gratitude to a woman? He coughed while pulling back the reins. He took it too far and shouldn't assume she was interested in him or becoming queen. He had already acted careless enough for one day. So, he took a different approach. "The chief herbalist must value your skills to invite you to work with him. Have you considered his offer any further?" Rose clicked her tongue. "I still need to speak with my sister about it. I nearly forgot, to be honest. Personally, I would love to, but I doubt my sister would be willing to leave, especially when she knows Nathaniel is still out there. It seems we are both overly concerned on our siblings' behalf. Perhaps we may all return to the castle once this is resolved, and Nathaniel and I can stop by whenever we require medicine." "Don't you have servants for that?" "Yes, but sometimes it's nice to go myself. However, I could request that you deliver my medicine, and then I'd offer you a seat while we eat confections." Richard couldn't believe the words falling out of his mouth. He had never requested a specific person to deliver anything to him, but he wanted to see Rose more. After discovering his brother was alive, a weight had been lifted off his back, though he still carried plenty of pounds. My, you must be incredibly lonely to bribe your staff to spend time with you." "That, or you're trying to cause a scandal," Rose panted, nearly out of breath once they made it to the house. She faced him when they reached the door. Richard flushed at her words, but his face was already pink from the cold. Thankfully, his voice remained sturdy. "Or perhaps I wish to get to know you better." Rose sank her teeth on the inside of her lips to keep her smile at bay. She said nothing else to the prince before opening the door. The smile emerged a little once she no longer looked directly at him. Snow sat straighter in the chair she had moved next to the fireplace. She stared at them expectantly. They reported back with their findings. They had seen bear paw prints, but tracking them at night during a snowfall was impossible. Snow expressed her disappointment but happily showed Richard to the spare bedroom she had prepared for him while they were gone. When the two girls settled in their own room, Snow hugged her pillow and made herself comfortable on Rose's bed. "So, how did you meet the prince?" she whispered. Rose cringed. "In one of the most embarrassing ways possible. Mostly for him, but still. He bumped into me and almost knocked me in the fire, but then he grabbed me, and we both fell over on the floor." "How indecent of you, sister," Snow teased. "I never knew you were bold enough to throw yourself at a crowned prince. You must really like him." "Snow!" Rose shouted, smacking her with a pillow. Snow laughed, quickly retreating to her own bed. "Well, if you ask me, I think he likes you too." Rose had picked up on that, but she would never admit it. Thinking about Richard's remarks, she was reminded of Elijah's offer. "Oh, and by the way, the chief herbalist offered us positions at the castle. I told him I'd ask you before committing to anything." Snow's happy mood died instantly. She sank her chin down into her pillow as she hugged it tighter. Instead of addressing the topic, she responded, I ran into that centaur again. Rose sighed but went along with it since she wanted to hear the story. What was it this time? An eagle stuck in his beard. The poor thing got shot once I freed it. I don't think the centaur likes you very much, Rose. Rose huffed, I can say the same thing about him. Just watch yourself, Rose, Snow whispered, don't go making enemies with the wrong people. I know. And as for you, don't let the past or your fears keep you here.